Good evening and welcome to tonight's edition of Talk Oxford. My name's Tony Long and I'll be your host for the evening, but more importantly I have two exciting guests for you to meet. So with no further ado, let's begin the process. First is a young GP, Amy Kirstein. Tell us just a little bit about yourself, Amy.
I am a GP currently working in Thame. I've only just moved to the area though, so Oxford and Thame is all very new for me, lots to discover. I have a baby boy who is 14 months old and takes up most of my time when I'm not working. And at the moment in the evenings, I am using those final little bits of time to rehearse a play with the Thame Players.
Well, how on earth do you find time for it?
I'm not quite sure at the moment.
What's the play?
The play is The Taming of the Shrew, the William Shakespeare play, but hopefully done with a slightly different slant to what people might have seen before.
No, you can't possibly be the shrew, so which part do you play?
No, I'm afraid I am.
Oh.
I have been judged to be suitably aggressive and intimidating to be the shrew, so we'll see what happens.
Great. So how are rehearsals going?
They're going very well, so we are also having the great advantage of having some workshops about Shakespeare and about Taming of the Shrew with a local actor called Bruce Alexander, who is rather raising our standards a little and kind of giving us some really juicy bits and tips to work on.
When's the play on?
It's on from the 7th to the 11th of July, so not too far away.
Well, one last plug for the play then. How do people get tickets?
If they go onto the Thame Players website, thameplayers.co.uk, they can find out everything they need to know there.
That's good. Thanks, Amy. And my other guest this evening is a local councillor, Mike Dyer, who, before we started, told me that people say he has a face for radio. So you can judge for yourselves. Mike, tell us a little bit about
all the viewers. Thank you, Tony. Yes, I originally grew up in the West Midlands via London, been in Thame now for 30 years. I've got two sons, both locally educated, both currently living overseas. And I've been a Thame Town Councillor for 8 years, just re-elected for another term of 4. I'm trustee of a couple of charities in Thame, and I'm the project coordinator for Thame Remembers.
Well, we'll be talking about that a bit more later. Good. Thanks, Mike. Well, the first subject that we thought we'd talk about tonight, as we have a doctor with us, is the government's proposals to make 7-day opening times for GPs. How practical is it? How on earth can that be achieved? And clearly the first person to ask that is Amy.
Well, I'm certainly not speaking on behalf of all GPs, but mostly from my own experience. And actually, in the last 5 years, I've moved all the way around the UK, from the south coast in Gosport up to Hampstead, Newcastle upon Tyne, and now kind of finally settling in the Thame area. So it's given me an interesting look at how general practice is coping or perhaps not coping at the moment. And I think for many people working in general practice surgeries, whether you're nurses or doctors or receptionists, at the moment we're feeling pretty pressured, and the thought of actually just stretching that pressure to another 2 days is quite scary. And even this evening on Radio 4 they were talking about some of the data that started the rush to move to a 7-day NHS perhaps not being as dramatic as it sounded. So a lot of the news headlines have been that if you're admitted at the weekend to a hospital, you have a higher chance of dying. And of course that sounds terrifying. I think everyone who works in the NHS would do anything to stop people coming off worse than they need to. But interestingly, some of the extra research that's been done, and particularly in Dublin, they've noticed that actually the people who are admitted at the weekends are the really, really unwell people. The people who are quite unwell usually wait till Monday, and so they go into hospital in a different way, but the people who are really sick are the ones who go in on the weekend. So by nature, they're the ones who often end up doing sadly worse. But I think nonetheless it would be wonderful if the NHS could provide the service that everyone wants all the time, just when you want it. but someone needs to pay for it and someone needs to do it.
Mike, you and I are sort of users, clearly, of all of this. It would be great for us to be able to do that, but how practical do you think it is?
I guess it would. Fingers crossed. I've always been extraordinarily healthy, so I have very little reason to go and see a GP apart from minor niggles, where I'm quite happy to wait the 3 or 4 days or whatever it takes. But I think you alluded to one thing by saying that people who go into hospital at weekends are the ones who are very ill. It is a fact of life that people get ill at the most inconvenient times, and many of those people would probably be better suited to see a GP before going into A&E or admitting themselves into hospital. So I think it's quite right that the vision should be to aim for a 7-day service. You can't just simply impose it. Neither do I think you can achieve it by throwing a lot more money at it. I think we're looking at some sort of systemic reorganisation within the system. And I know that that's total anathema to anybody in the NHS to talk about reorganisation, but we do seem to throw more and more money at the NHS without seeing any significant improvement. Perhaps there is another way.
I think one of the reorganisations that a lot of people in the NHS would love to see would be the technology tying up. So GPs don't actually not work at weekends. There are a whole fleet of GPs working every single weekend, every night, hour, every bit that a GP surgery is closed. So they're on the other end of the line. The problem is they're not your GP. And actually, if you're sick, seeing a familiar face, though wonderful, probably isn't the most important thing. But you want someone who knows your story, your medicines and your background. And at the moment, that's information that's kind of locked in the GP surgeries to some degree when the door closes. And from my point of view, the thing that I think that could be done to be a system change without disrupting things completely would be to enable those doctors working out of hours and the ones in A&E and on the wards to see everything that we see about patients. Of course, it's technologically hugely complicated and far from my specialist subject, but
and also a lot of people don't want their records to be available other than to their own surgery, and that sort of ethical element to it is a problem too. But surely if we do go to 7 days, then we will need more GPs. You can't simply spread what you've got, even though you may be able to do as you're saying, and that is a sort of you can talk to someone who's not your regular GP. And it takes, 10 years to go from start to actually becoming a GP.
Yeah.
What's the practical timescale of getting all this done?
It's getting a more worrying situation as every month goes past at the moment. Oxford region did a survey last year looking at their GPs and found that a huge swathe of them were saying, I can't take this anymore. I am retiring early, I'm cutting down my hours, or I'm emigrating. So people going off to Australia and New Zealand to get a better work-life balance, to get some of the pressure off. And so actually GPs are leaving and they are failing to fill the GP training numbers. So roughly about half of people who qualify as a doctor should go into general practice, but they just don't want to. And it's kind of heartbreaking because at its best it is a really amazing job where you should build up a rapport, hopefully starting with people with their minor niggles, and then sometimes seeing them through the worst and hopefully some of the best days of their life, like the next generation being born or getting some good news or preventing them from developing a disease, which is one of the key things of general practice. But people working it at the moment are just saying it's too much. So who wants to come and join that job at the moment? Not a lot of people, I'm afraid.
No, that obviously is very unfortunate. If we are going to bring this in, what is the timescale that's practical? Are we talking 5 years, 10 years? To what extent do we need to bring in doctors from overseas, perhaps? Because we've been doing that for many years in any case, haven't we?
And not so much in general practice as far as I know, but you're right, hospital-based, many specialties have recruited doctors, and particularly from the EU, and I think that's been really successful in some cases. It's difficult. People feel quite emotional about their GPs and like to have, ideally, continuity and a rapport and see the same person. So the ideal would be to get people that come and stay and get really stuck in, and perhaps people coming from other countries wouldn't be the solution, but maybe you're right. If we're working on a shorter timescale, it's time to look at that, but we've got to make it attractive to them as well. And at the moment, I don't know if I could sell it to someone to come out here and take on what a lot of GPs are doing at the moment.
But isn't it almost as if very few medical students choose to go into general practice these days? They'll all go off into their specialisations, surgery, whatever. Wouldn't it be right that being a GP for 2 or 3 years is part of the apprenticeship at the end of their training before they go into a specialisation?
It's been tried to be more of a part of most people's training, so I think they were aiming that everyone would do about 4 months in general practice, but not quite the 3 years that you were suggesting. The problem is it takes 3 years to train to be a GP once you've done 2 years in hospital. So you do 5 years at university, 2 years in hospital, then 3 years of GP, and actually that training means missing doctors. But I would love it in some ways, because often our hospital colleagues don't quite understand what we're dealing with, and it's nice that we have some idea usually of what they're dealing with because we've been in hospital, but it would be a good idea.
Because in general practice you're dealing with people, in hospital they're dealing with problems.
I suppose, and also the different time pressures, the fact that we're trying to join up people's often multiple different medical problems, and trying to do that often in 10 minutes, which is our kind of section.
We're soon going to have to go to a break. Do you think this will actually happen within the lifetime of this Parliament, say?
I am pessimistic. If they don't change rapidly, I think it'll go the other way.
Okay, thank you, Amy. That was very interesting. Well, now we need to take a break. If you'd like to get in touch with us, then please do. You can email us at talk@that'soxford.com, or you can tweet us at That's Oxford TV. After the break, you may remember Mike was referring to Tammy members. We'll be asking him a bit more about that after this break.